homes, which is not a normal thing that we ask for. Also new provisions for corners of buildings and a new linear park that has been provided along Ardrey-Kell. The modification, there's a one less unit. This actually gets us underneath what the general development policies had called for, and a 30-foot buffer which is provided along what would be the backs of the houses along Ardrey-Kell and along Wade Ardrey Road to provide a little more distance there as well. The building still offers more amenity areas, which was also another comment that was made by neighbors and by council at the prior meetings. And we still have a buffer between this and the other areas as well. So in terms of the staff recommendation, we are recommending approval of this with just a few very technical revisions that need to be made to the plan. It's consistent with the South District Plan. It's consistent with the general development policies.
Thank you, Mr. Main. We have one speaker for Mr. Brown, Colin Brown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Colin Brown with K&L Gates on behalf of the petitioner. We joked at our original hearing about everything in this area having the name Ardrey attached to it. So I'm pleased to let you know that Joe Ardrey and Marshall Ardrey are joining us tonight for our second public hearing on this. Kent has done a nice job. Since we're tight on time, I'll just try to hit some highlights. This is a timeline of our community outreach. We have been meeting for months with the community. I think Councilmember Driggs can attest. Our first meeting had about 60 attendees. They have slowly dwindled over time, and proud to hear that there are no speakers in opposition tonight. I think the credit goes to the development team as well as the Ardreys for being as flexible as they possibly can. Here's the location of the site across from the high school. Current status. There's some things that we heard at the hearing in January you all asked us to look at. We looked at the density. We've lost one unit, but we're under the recommendation. I did want you to point out to you, as Kent mentioned, there's similar zoning sides. There are also the zonings that are approved for the townhome projects in the area have about the same density. These were approved 15 years ago in 2003 and 2004, so we don't think there's a great reach on density out there. As Kent mentioned, we revised our site plan. You could look at the two of these. You may not see major differences, but there are subtle differences. The things that you asked us to look at and the community asked us to look at were trying to create more parking to ensure that our residents would not be parking in adjacent neighborhoods. So we have amended the plan to do that. We have some different product types in now to ensure that each unit will have ample parking in addition to on-street parking. That kind of brought about some different unit types. We've talked with the community about that. I think they were pleased with the variety of unit types that would be there. I mentioned to you parking. We now essentially the plan is every unit will have a two-car garage, the driveway that can park 2 cars, and then we have approximately 142 parking spaces on street. The on-street spaces do not mean they're just parking in the middle of the street. All of these are recessed parking spaces. So you can see here, this is a similar one. They are bulbed out, so they're not parking in the vehicular lanes. At the last meeting, we talked about vehicular areas. Mr. Driggs, I think you asked about the density for where the homes were. We were able to calculate out we have almost 14 acres of open space, almost 3 miles of new sidewalks that will come with this project, and then there is 1.6 acres of amenitized areas. Those are clubhouses, pocket parks, things like that. So a lot has been done. We did share elevations. We have written commitments in our development standards. So I know y'all are in a tight timeline tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but pleased with how far this has come, and hopefully you've received some positive emails.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the staff or the petitioner? Are there any questions of the staff or the petitioner?
The only thing I would ask by way of clarification is what happened on the intersections with the light? What are we doing exactly about the interface with Ardrey-Kell, which is a crowded thoroughfare?
I think Kent mentioned to you the commitments on the turn lanes, the commitment in the rezoning. This is an NCDOT street. We talked about that earlier, Ardrey-Kell. The petitioner has committed to build a traffic signal and fund that if that is approved by NCDOT.
So that's the only thing that depends on is the NCDOT approval.
That's correct.
All right, I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Phipps?
I would just like to compliment the agent, Mr. Colin Brown here. The thoroughness of your community report at 112 pages was noteworthy.
I'm sure he personally got
I'm looking at my associate over there, who's the author of that, so she thanks you.
Compliment the associate. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Do I have a motion to close?
So moved?
Second.
All right, and all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. The next petition that we have is petition number 2017-183 by Hopper Communities for approximately 3 acres located on the north side of Runnymede Lane, east of Selwyn. It's in Council Member District 6, and it is currently zoned single-family residential with 3 units an acre. The request is urban residential conditional. We have Mr. Main to give us an overview. We have 4 speakers for and 2 speakers against, and that means we'll have 10 minutes per side with a rebuttal for those that are in opposition, for the petitioner to respond to those that speak against it. So we'll have Mr. Main, and the people that are speaking in favor are Nick Bouchon, Bart Hopper, John Carmichael, and Clay McCullough. So as soon as Mr. Main is completed, please join the podium.
All right, this is a 3-acre site on Runnymede Lane, which is, you see that in the center of your slide. It's just off of Selwyn Avenue. It is surrounded by single-family residential R3, and the site itself is R3. You can see just up here in the striped area, there's Tranquil Court and Reed's Fine Foods. Right over here is Woodlawn, is the Park Road Shopping Center. And here is Myers Park High School. This is very close to that in location. The existing zoning is R3. The adopted future land use calls for single family, subject to general development policies, which would allow up to 12 units per acre on this site. And the particular site plan that we have calls for, let's see, it's 26 townhomes on the site, and entering off of a road on Windsor Drive. You can see the buildings arrayed there. This is a very, has really rolling topography on it. It has 26 units, 8 buildings, 4 units per building. There's a path along the front sidewalk and landscape areas around. In particular, to the single-family neighborhoods behind, it has a 30-foot buffer, landscaped buffer along that side. Not quite so generous on the 2 sides, on either side of the property. You can see from this sort of a rendition or of the site, the kind of topography there, particularly as it steps down the side. This is the view from the neighborhoods to the rear, and this is sort of a front view. And if you look very closely, you can see existing homes there and there on either side. That poses our biggest area of concern. Because the townhouse sits here, the site has been somewhat leveled out at that point, and you see a backyard and a pretty steep bit of retaining wall there with the existing home right at the top of that. So a little bit less on the side than the 30 feet that they've offered at the back. Likewise, on the other side, this is the one house left between this property and Myers Park High School, which sort of sits down below the grade of the road and is separated by another series of cascading, very tall bulkheads that you can see there. The staff does recommend approval of this plan with some outstanding issues, and the issues are particularly the buffer to adjacent homes and the landscaping that's provided there. There are also some other notes and clarifications, but of minor incident. It is consistent with the South District Plan. It also meets the general development policies as to the densities.
Okay, Mr. Carmichael, I guess you'll start us off.
Pardon me. Madam Mayor, members of council and the zoning committee, I'm John Carmichael. I'm here on behalf of the petitioner, Hopper Communities. With me tonight are Bart Hopper and Clay McCullough of Hopper Communities. They're available to answer your questions. And Mr. Nick Bichon of Design Resource Group. He's the landscape architect that's worked on the site plan, and he's available to answer any technical questions you may have or any other questions that you may have. The site contains just over 3 acres. It's located on the north side of Runnymede, just to the east of Selwyn Avenue. Further to the east would be Myers Park High School, Alexander Graham Middle School, and Selwyn Elementary School. To the west is Park Road Shopping Center and Montford Drive, which are entertainment areas, and they're both very easily walkable from the site in question. Briar Creek, the Briar Creek Greenway is also located to the east of the site. This is another aerial of the site. The site is comprised of 5 single-family lots. Starts here, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5 you can't see because of the trees that are protecting or covering those homes. And this is a view of the site as seen from Windsor Drive, which is directly across the site, and these are 2 of the homes that are on the site, and as you can see, they're pretty close to Runnymede Lane. The site is zoned R3, as Mr. Main said, and the request is to rezone the site to UR2 CD to accommodate up to 26 for-sale townhome units. The overall density would be about 8.64 units an acre. The GDP support up to 12 units an acre, as Mr. Main said. This is the site plan. The vehicular access point would be from Runnymede Lane. It would line up directly across from Windsor Drive. The townhome units would be served by internal private drives. There would be a 30-foot landscape, tree save area and landscaped area along the northern boundary of the site to about this point. Supplemental trees and shrubs would be planted in the tree save area, evergreen trees, and the minimum height of the evergreen trees at the time of installation would be 8 to 10 feet, and that's a recent commitment of the petitioner. Along the western edge of the site, the buildings are separated from the western property line by about 23 feet here and 32 feet here. Within that separation or that setback area, there'd be a 10-foot landscaped area with evergreen trees and shrubs, and then a 6-foot tall wooden screen fence. Along the eastern edge of the site, there would be tree save areas here, and then there would be supplemental evergreen trees and shrubs planted in areas where it's bare in the southernmost portion of this tree save area. There would also be shrubs planted on the high side of the lower retaining wall here, and then on the high side of this retaining wall, there'd be a decorative fence installed. This is a grass drive here to access the BMP. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, but right here. Mr. Bichon will probably go over this in response to some questions, but the separation from about this point to the common property line is about 60 feet. And then that separation obviously increases as you go north into the site. Each townhome unit would have a 2-car garage. The units in these 2 buildings would also have a 20-foot wide or 20-foot in depth tandem driveway. So these units would each have 4 parking spaces. The other units would have 2-car garages, so 2-car parking spaces. At one of our initial meetings, a concern of some of the neighbors was they wanted to make sure there was adequate guest parking. So the original plan contained about 3 guest parking spaces. This plan contains 13. So overall, for 26 units, there are just over 80 parking spaces on the site. In terms of the architecture, it's Hopper Communities, they didn't pull these off the shelf. They design all their products for a specific site. So this product that I'm going to share with you was designed specifically for the site. Now, before I share the architecture, I omitted to tell you about building height, and I know you're going to want to know about that. This building here would have a maximum height of 40 feet. This building here next to Runnymede would have a maximum height of 40 feet. The 3 buildings that front Runnymede would have a maximum height of 48 feet, and they could have rooftop terraces that face the interior portion of the site. This building here would have a maximum height of 40 feet, and these 2 buildings here would have a maximum height of 35 feet. Back to the architecture, the exterior building materials would be brick, cementitious siding, or lap siding, and cementitious panels, and then architectural shingles. The brick could be a combination of painted brick and natural brick color. And once again, this is looking into the site from Runnymede Lane, and you can see that each unit has individual and unique features, so they all don't look alike. This is the view of the project on the 12-foot multi-use path that would be installed along the site's frontage on Runnymede Lane. There would be an 8-foot plane strip and a 12-foot multi-use path installed along the site's frontage on Runnymede Lane, and this is looking towards Myers Park High School on that path. This is looking at some of the units on the northern portion of the site as if you're in the backyards of the neighbors on Hassel Place. This gives you a good idea of the quality and uniqueness of the design and also of the scale of those units. This is a view from the Hassel Place properties on the north part of the site with the trees removed. The purpose of this slide is to show you the scale of the units, the gaps between the buildings. They really almost look like single-family homes. And then Mr. Main mentioned the topography of the site. You can see how dramatic it falls as you move from the west to the east. And once again, this is a view from Runnymede Lane, and it really demonstrates the topography along Runnymede and along the site, moving from west to east. It's hard to see on this slide, but the adjoining property owner's home is here, so you also get a sense of the relationship between this building and the adjoining property owner's residence. In addition to the architectural commitments, the buffers, and those sort of things, there are other commitments on the rezoning plan that the petitioners made. The maximum height of any freestanding lighting fixture will be 12 feet. There are hours or construction hours that are going to be imposed, limits on the hours of construction in consultation with some of the neighbors. Dumpsters and compactors would not be allowed on the site, except, of course, during construction activities where you'd have to have a construction dumpster. Additionally, the petitioner has agreed to commit to contribute $25,000 to CDOT for a project along the Runnymede Lane corridor. This is at the request of SPAN, the South Park area neighbors, and it's not on the rezoning plan as we sit here tonight, but it will be on the rezoning plan that we submit to the planning staff no later than Monday. The planning staff does recommend approval. There are some outstanding issues. We will work to resolve those issues as best we can. The petitioner has worked hard to create a site plan that hopefully works for the community and the neighbors. It's a very challenging site topographically. It requires fill and retaining walls to develop it, and once again, it's a pretty significant fall as you move from the west to the east. We're happy to continue dialogue with the neighbors, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. You have approximately 2 minutes. Do you want to use that additional time?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So if we could now hear from those opposed to the project, Mr. Jonathan Spinola and Richard Chandler. If you'll come down, please. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. So first off, I represent Mr. Wade Miller, the property owner to the east side of the project.
Did you give us your name? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Jonathan Espinola with Bass Dunklin, McCullen Smith. Represent Wade Miller, address of 2420 Runnymede Lane. On the project side, he is the property owner on the easternmost portion adjacent to the property. And frankly, the site plan, notwithstanding the staff's recommendations and the pre-hearing analysis, I believe the district requirements and recommendations of the generalized land plan recommend that this be single family with a density of 4 units per acre. The 8.65 proposed units more than doubles the 4 units per acre. And throughout the ordinance, the single-family districts limit attached dwellings to duplexes and does not contemplate attached units with 3 or 4 buildings, which is the case here. And additionally, there were some comments in the staff analysis that this is a transitional property. And I would urge council and Madam Mayor to consider that this is not a transitional area. This is completely enveloped by single-family residential use. It's not the same as Park Road, which was mentioned in the staff analysis, where you have mixed use and residential combined. This is single-family use with a high school nearby to the east. And as far as Mr. Miller, his property being adjacent to the property on the east, there are two major concerns that Mr. Miller has that have already been raised with the developer, and there doesn't appear to be much traction, although it does appear that the staff in the pre-hearing analysis has taken this into effect as far as the buffer. Proximity and height are the two major issues for Mr. Miller. And the pre-staff hearing analysis recommends that there be a 30-foot buffer to the east, as in lieu of the tree save, which on the way to the hearing today, I actually drove by that tree save. It is very thin. It does not adequately provide any type of buffer to this massive, basically 70 to 80-foot wall that's going to be adjacent to my client's property. And in addition to just having some sort of concrete or brick, painted brick, whatever the material may be, there is some recommendation in the staff analysis that states some additional landscaping may be beneficial. But if you add some additional landscape in front of these retaining walls, all you're doing is pushing this massive wall, whether it be concrete or greenery, you're pushing this massive wall onto the adjacent property owner. So we would urge and reiterate staff and pre-hearing analysis recommendations that this 30-foot Class C buffer be implemented between my client's property along the eastern side portion of this project, and not just the circle around his dwelling, the entire eastern property line.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chan, I'm sorry, were you done?
I'm sorry, I still have to touch on the
No,
height issue.
I'm sorry, I just wanted you to know you've got 6 minutes left between the two of you.
Okay, and I think I'm going to give Mr. Chandler here is a minute. I'll take another minute and I'll pass it on to Mr. Chandler. So the height of the project, a lot of the height has to deal with the grade of the project site. If you go from east to west on the project site, you're looking at about 70 feet of topographical change. But if you look at the actual building height of the project, there's only about 10 feet difference between the tallest and the lowest building. So what's that's basically doing is pushing the height of the topography out to the edges of the project. And in doing so, you've got these large retaining walls on either side of the property that basically is sucking up the value from the neighboring properties and providing additional property value to the developer. And understandably so, there may be some cost issues, but I would think that the developer, in working with the neighboring community, could entertain some additional ways to work the topography of this land to not just build it up and be a project on top of a hill, whereas you have the additional properties to the east and the west basically looking straight up at this development. So I would urge that the topography of the land be considered in any type of recommendation by council in further revisions, so the developer can potentially bear some of that additional topography and not push it onto the neighbors. And in Mr. Miller's specific example here, buildings D and E, they both are going to be about 78 to 80 feet high when you consider the grade and the way that Mr. Miller's topography is situated. He's somewhat in a hole where his building is, and the neighbors, their roof lines are pretty consistent with where he is. So when you factor that in and you look at this development that's going to be built up top, roughly 80 feet above the roof line, of my client's property. I mean, this is going to be a massive wall of concrete or greenery, depending on what is done here. And just in general, I would state that this is just inconsistent with the general area as far as being a residential use with detached single-family homes. And by doing this, Mr. Miller's property is basically being enclosed by the development and the high school, which is nearby to the east. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Chandler if he wants to add some comments here.
Mr. Chandler, you have 3 minutes.
In the interest of brevity here, I would like to just say that I have 2 main points about this project. I am, just for identification, I'm on the west side. I have a 5-foot buffer between my property and the first retaining wall of the 2 retaining walls. We have asked for 30. The Planning Commission came out right up front and has maintained all along that it should be 30, Class C. It has not apparently been something that is deemed worthwhile by the petitioner to address. I have basically a 75-foot lot width that goes all the way along that property line, but I have almost a third of the number of units of the whole property along my property line. All of those backyards, all of those, you don't really see patios because they've been tempered to not show up very well, but they are right smack up against the retaining walls that they're putting in. The trees, there's no such thing on this whole property really as tree save. It's a misnomer. The property is basically being leveled. It is, for the most part, for about 3 of the properties on the low side toward the Millers, is a ravine that has to be massively handled with cut and fill to make that work. So the whole land, the whole 3 acres is being leveled to create a pan to put these units on. I know I'm probably right up at 3 minutes here, but that's basically the gist of my argument, that I am taking a disproportionate amount of the impact, while on the backside, Hassel Place property owners are looking out their backyards through this property toward Runnymede, and there was great deference given to them to get that sort of tree and combination of building breakup. But I have asked, and I've gotten no attention whatsoever, to get something broken up along my property line with those 7 units there. I think that I should, and I have, obviously, the shortest property line of all of them. So I think that they could redo that and address those things for a future plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have a few minutes for them to complete, so you have 24 seconds, not a few minutes. I should have said a few seconds.
Well, so I think also that there's I know the DOT has weighed in on this, and I think that there's a problem with the only access to this property aligning with Windsor Place, Windsor Drive. I think that is if you know that site, you know the proximity of the traffic light at the corner of Selwyn, and you're coming over that rise, under that light, and
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be questions about this and lots of comments. So we have 2 minutes for the rebuttal.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council and zoning committee. I'm going to ask Mr. Bashan just to go through, it's hard to see, but let's go through the retaining walls, the building separation, the finished floor elevation, and that sort of information, if you might.
Hey, good evening. My name's Nick Bouchon. I've been working with John and Hopper Communities through the petition. And this edge right here, this is Wade Miller's edge. This is the eastern property line right here. And I'm going to work from his point over. So you can see his house, existing property line right here, existing sewer easement right here. It's about 5 feet from this corner to the property line. And then you're looking at 80 feet from that corner of the house to the unit right there. From this retaining wall right there to that back corner is 45 feet. And then from the building edge right here to the property line is roughly 60 feet. And then an additional 20 feet from the property line over to this corner of the house, or to the existing home. So you're looking at 82 feet total from this corner over to the existing home. There are some retaining walls on the site. As everybody has mentioned, that has been a challenge since day one. There's over 70 feet of fall from the west side to the east side of the site. So no matter what, retaining walls they have to occur, and we're maxing out our percentages as much as possible, working with my engineering team to make it work internally with utilities and everything else. This is a higher retaining wall along this edge. The maximum height is approximately 18 feet. And then this wall that wraps around, our goal was to preserve as much tree save along this edge when we were laying it out and grading the site. It was hand in hand as we were working on the planning with Hopper Communities. And this is a smaller tier retaining wall with the maximum height of approximately 8 feet to 10 feet. And then it tapers down on the back edge from this point back and then down to the front right there. Okay, so
I'm sorry, your time is up. We'll hear from you, I'm sure. I want you to know, it's very hard to see those maps on our screen, so.
we apologize.
It's not, we'll have to work with that. I have Mr. Eggleston, Mr. Bakari, and Mr. Winston.
I am going to finish, I think, the point that Mr. Chandler ran out of time and was not able to make. So I'll ask a question, and I'll do you the favor of also giving you the correct answer. I presume that something will be done on this site that would preclude someone from driving straight across Runnymede from Windsor Drive into the driveway or vice versa, correct?
No, sir. Randy Goddard, our traffic engineer here, but NCDOT has reviewed this, and we're not aware of any problems with this driveway location. Can I get Mr. Goddard to come down, our traffic engineer? But there's no plan for a median, Councilmember Eggleston.
I would,
Then that would be it's a state road, that would have to be approved by the state.
It would become taking your own life in your hands.
I would propose that that would be a very dangerous maneuver going in either direction, to come out of that driveway across to Windsor or from Windsor across into the driveway, which I think was the point Mr. Chandler was going to make. And he's nodding, I think. The lights are bright, it's hard to see.
I'm Randy Goddard with Design Resource Group. We looked at traffic for this site. We've also talked with Charlotte DOT and NCDOT. And first of all, we anticipate very low traffic making that movement. Obviously, you've got traffic and congestion on Runnymede, especially during the school hours. So all the way up and down there during that time, you've got slow speeds. Like I said, there's a lot of congestion, but anticipating cars going from the neighborhood across, I mean, I would see that being very random as far as that happening. And of course, it would have to be someone that is comfortable in being able to make that movement.
I would agree that it probably would be random, but I would also reiterate that it would be dangerous. One direction of traffic's coming around what's a somewhat blind curve, and I would propose that, given that it would be random, that it's needed, just prevent it.
Well, there's actually not a blind curve because there is enough sight distance there because you do have that full movement intersection already at the subdivision.
Okay. We're going to have to follow our rules here so that we can all stay safe. All right, I have Mr. Eggleston. Thank you. Mr. Bakari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, we've been at this for several months, and even more than that, to be honest. And everyone has really had a lot of great, productive conversations. The fact that the petitioner has worked so closely with the neighbors, and if you didn't hear inside his presentation, there have been a number of concessions that have been made already to this point that has brought the South Park Association of Neighborhoods and the local homeowners associations to a much better place, including height elements, parking that you heard, $25,000 that was negotiated for DOT improvements in the area. So a lot of good stuff there, plus the fact that it's really a beautiful design, and I think a lot of the neighbors recognize that. So I definitely want to applaud you for that. And then the two things as it relates to what I'd like to do over the next 30 days would be, one, you know, I think we've addressed, and I just texted and got a response back from a couple of the neighborhood leaders. Most people are satisfied, so we've got the majority of everyone comfortable with where we are in these two cases of adjacent properties. Let's see what else can be done. I do understand, with all the conversations we've had, that grading makes this an incredibly challenging task for anyone who's going to do anything there. So, but let's just see if there are other concessions or things that can be made to help those folks. And two, and this might be more for staff, if it's possible in the next 30 days to do some form of a larger review of Runnymede and Woodlawn for a traffic flow, a pedestrian safety perspective. A lot of our community leaders have been on this topic for a while. I know it's very important to them, and I think all the developer and everyone the petitioner have done the right things to date. I just want to make sure, especially now that we have 25,000 plus CNIP money and other things, that we take this opportunity to look at that from a safety, from a traffic flow and congestion perspective, and to Councilman Eggleston's point, you know, dangers as well, so that we can properly deploy those funds.
And we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Winston.
Thank you. So along the same lines of my colleagues, I'm pretty familiar with this stretch of road, and I know that it is not very, it's not the most walkable of areas, although there are sidewalks, as I see, I'm looking on the street view right now. But as we do continue to build a denser Charlotte in all areas of town, especially in an area like this where, I mean, it's just exploding in terms of not just people living, but places for people to take advantage of services and play and work. I think for me to support this, I'm going to need to see some improvement on the walkability of this area. I'm looking at it right now. It doesn't look like it's very comfortable for people to walk side by side. You do have a high school there. A little further down the road, you have a middle school. You have the Park Road Shopping Center not too far away. Selwyn Avenue is just, it's bumping at night and during the day. If we're going to do a project like this in the area, we have to take that into consideration. Hopefully there'll be families that move in here. Maybe the kids want to walk to high school, and you know, I'll have to drive by and kind of sharpen my pencil on it. But I think speed is a problem, especially if you can't walk, you know, 2 or 3 people by side. It's just not a very comfortable walking environment. So I would love to see solutions from the petitioner. I don't know if this is something you know, maybe I ask of staff, do we have a walking study on this stretch of road? What are our suggestions for this area as we, you know, kind of look at our kind of transportation infrastructure period, you know? So.
And one of the things that they do have is that 12-foot path along the front, so that's...
Excuse me?
One of the things that they do have is that 12-foot path along the front of this particular property. And how it connects in, we can take another look at all of that.
Well, yeah, and I'm looking at it. It's just, there is a planter and there are trees between the sidewalk, but it's this stretch of road, and it's just not enough right now. Especially if there are going to be people, potentially more people crossing the street. I really would feel much more comfortable if this was a better walking environment along Runnymede Lane.
I had a couple of questions that I just wanted to ask. I was wondering, in the book it says, fire department, no on-street parking allowed. And so out of the 26 units, the 13 guest spaces, and no parking will be allowed on the streets and interior streets of the complex. And how will you enforce that?
So these are reserved 90-degree parking that we have in
I'm
here
sorry,
for cars.
it's very hard for us to...
Is it really bright?
No, I can see it.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's where guest parking would be located, and then in the internal private access, this is where no parking would be allowed along these edges, and that's where homes would be accessed through internal garages. And then between these two buildings right here, there's tandem driving, so residents can park behind their garage, and then another additional space, 2 spaces inside the garage as well.
So with the 26 units, the 13 guests, the guest spaces are there, and then you can have tandem parking, so the 2-car garages will actually house 4 cars, just parked behind each other, 1 on the pad, 2 on the pad and 2 in the garage. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's for these 2 buildings right here.
All right. So the other thing that I was just wondering, who's going to pick up the garbage?
Private collection.
Private collection, so the streets are private and the collection of the garbage is private. Okay. And that means in those driveways, you'll have garbage roll-out cans in each driveway once a week, or so, right? Or maybe a couple, okay. So, I'm always concerned that, a lot of times people see the great pictures, and they are great pictures, but when it comes to actually coming in and saying, how do you do the circulation around for the everyday kinds of things that go on? And I'm going to follow up with Mr. Winston. The bus stop, is right at the playing fields of Selwyn, and the kids walk all the way up, and they walk 3 across, and the sidewalks are not very comfortable or passable now. They're adequate, and they're old, and they've been the same ones since all of us used to walk them long times ago, and I just am very concerned about just the normal part. And so, will the entrance be one way in and one way out? Because the traffic backs up on Runnymede pretty consistently past that area all the way down to close, is Michael Baker, or whatever the other street is beyond that. So the traffic's pretty tough there from 6 in the morning. So is it a one-way in and one-way out of the complex?
Yes, ma'am.
So you can't, there'll be no left turn into.
Well, I thought there's one access point.
No, I'm saying, will there be one way in and one way out? Because if you are going to stop to make a left turn to go home at 5 o'clock at night, evening, I can't imagine what it's going to look like.
That would be difficult.
Yeah, that would be very difficult. So, those are questions that I had. So, Mr. Bakari and Mr. Phipps.
Just one more point, Madam Mayor. You bring up excellent points around the challenging nature, as well as Councilman Winston, of walkability, of congestion, all the way down Runnymede, Woodlawn, by the high school, Michael Baker, going up Barclay Downs. I would, that was one of the reasons for my staff ask of safety and all those things. But what I would say is, we've worked for months with this petitioner and the neighborhoods, not trying to put an overly over-the-top burden on the petitioner in this, given the relatively smaller number of daily trips that they'd be doing versus the challenge we have there. So I think everyone got more comfortable with the addition of parking spaces. With a few of the other things, I think we will follow up on some of those turns and the traffic things we've heard about here. But the fact that we were, above all of that, able to get another $25,000 to leverage wherever we could best see fit in that corridor for walkability, for safety things, that was them going over and above kind of their part to help us with a problem that's, quite frankly, a city problem. This is one of our problems and our capital investment problems. So I'm so glad that you brought those up, and I know that our neighborhood leaders will be as well.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Bakari, because I understand how people make contributions to help out the overall area, but this one that worries me the most is being able to make a left or a right turn there into that area with 26 people and the amount of congestion there. I just see that as particularly difficult. All of us drive that area, I'm sure, some point of time, and we have other communities where we've built something that are townhouses, and you can only come, they've actually put the triangular piece in the middle that prevents you from coming in, and no left turns there. I also can't imagine garbage trucks stopping on a left to turn across that two-lane street in the morning. They're just the conveniences of life that people expect when they join a nice community like the one that you are planning. So it's not a problem with the plan for the community, but I don't want people to be swayed by pretty buildings and then get there and say, back here before our dais, saying, what were you thinking? Okay. So any other comments?
Mr. Phipps.
Mr. Phipps, I'm sorry.
I had a question about the number of bedrooms in the townhomes. Are they, I mean, is there a dispersion? Are they 1, 2, 3, or all of them the same? Or how does that, what's the makeup of the bedrooms in the townhomes themselves?
Combination of 3 and 4 bedrooms.
3 and
Councilmember.
4? Okay, well, it brings me to the point then, I guess I'm confused about the impact of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, because it basically says that the existing zoning would only generate 8 students, and then the proposed zoning would generate 1 student with a net effect of 0 students, which I can't understand how you can have 3 and 4 bedrooms, and that would be the only impact.
Millennials bunking up, basically.
Oh, they're in the basement.
So I don't know if that's an error.
You guys want to get a place there with me?
Hey,
I don't know if I could afford it.
neither can the millennials.
Not on this salary.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're looking at the bedroom size and, 4 bedrooms, how many cars? That's a lot. So just thinking it through. All right, any other questions? Do we have a motion to close? Thank you. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Let's see, our next agenda item is item 28. Wait a minute, is it?
27.
Come on, is 27?
27 was
Deferred, that's what I thought, that was the one that we added the deferral to. So the next item is number 28, petition 2017-161 by Central Piedmont Community College for approximately 1.7 acres on the southeast of Charlottetown Avenue. Current zoning, it's in District 1. The current zoning is B2, General Business, Office, and Neighborhood Services. And the proposed zoning is mixed-use development, optional with 5-year vested rights. Staff recommends approval. This has a petitioner that is for and against, so we'll have the staff presentation, and the petitioner will have 10 minutes, the opposition 10 minutes, and 2 minutes rebuttal. So, Ms. Keplinger.
Yes, ma'am. This property is located off of Charlottetown Avenue, East 5th, and Elizabeth Avenue. You can see this is the majority of this area is the CPCC campus, and this rezoning is for CPCC. In terms of the existing zoning, it's in S, Neighborhood Services, and O2, Office, and B2, General Business. The request is to mixed-use development optional with 5-year vested rights. This is the existing zoning. You see that we have a plethora of zoning districts in this area, but we have an awful lot of mud optional. The properties between Torrance and Charlottetown, these are some of the properties that have not rezoned to mud. In terms of the future land use, the land use plan recommends office, retail, residential for the subject properties. And you can see, again, institutional uses for the CPCC campus, and then, again, office, institutional, and residential for most of the surrounding properties. The request is to allow 2 buildings with up to 250,000 square feet for all uses in the MUD, including the institutional campus. They're providing streetscape along Charlottetown Avenue, East 5th, and along Elizabeth. They're providing building elevations and materials, and I'll show you those elevations in a minute. The pedestrian improvements at the intersection of Elizabeth and Charlottetown Avenue, and they're requesting 2 optionals to allow temporary buildings and storage uses in conjunction with the construction of 6 different building buildings located on the central campus, and the elimination of the requirement for additional dedication of right-of-way for the 9-foot planting strip along Elizabeth Avenue. There's one other additional optional request that staff believes that they need, and that is in our outstanding issues. So this is a look at the proposal for the buildings. You can see the various elevations. Before I go into the rationale, Joanna Quinn is here from CDOT to provide information on transportation.
Good evening, Joanna Quinn with CDOT to talk a little bit more about the transportation items on this petition. So here's the site in green. First, we're going to talk about sort of all modes but the roads. So this is a area that has a lot of transit service. The city's made great investment in streetcar. As you can see from all of the bus routes, it's very well served by bus as well. We also have an existing greenway spine. It is Little Sugar Creek Greenway, also known as Cross Charlotte Trail, to serve bike and ped in the area as, I hope you all can see your map better than I can. Better than I can. I hope it's coming out for you well. There's a lot on it. We also have existing signed bike routes, which here, along with the bike lanes and the addition of bike lanes through development on the outer perimeters. From the standpoint of bike ped, CDOT has asked the petitioner to add blank out signs at the signal, a multi-use path along their frontage, along with a pedestrian refuge across Charlottetown, and to fill a gap of the multi-use path and adjustment to the signed bike route in this area. When we switch over to talk about the street network, this one's a little bit different for us. The trip generation for this site, according to our typical guidance and consistency with how we have done these in the past, was 6,870, with an entitlement of 2,210. So they did reach the threshold for our normal guidelines for traffic study, where this area, the map shows the signals in the surrounding area, one adjacent to the site. As you can see, this is a good grid network as an extension of Uptown. As we have just discussed, this is also a high bike ped served area along with transit. The area is intended to strike a balance, if not lean a little towards the bike ped mode. It has developed in that way. The intersections are not large. They're small in order to better support the bike ped activity in the area. The intent is to not continue to expand them, but in order to describe how these can support the area, I wanted to show you what we looked at from the congestion standpoint. So the red dots out here, this is Caswell and 7th, and over here is the I-277 and Kenilworth. These two fall within CDOT's high congestion list. They fall with high congestion in the AM and the PM, and you can see they are quite a distance from the subject rezoning. Out here, we have 7th and Central. This falls as very moderately congested in the AM or the PM. And then we have 3rd at Charlottetown, the only intersection on our congestion list that's within a couple of blocks of the subject rezoning, and it shows up as moderate congestion, which would be 30 minutes or less in the AM and the PM. So we took these items into account when deciding whether or not to pursue a traffic study for the area. And what we determined was these intersections are functioning well. They suit the balance of cars, bikes, and peds. And the one place where we felt like we had an ask which is arguably some distance away from the rezoning, is at 3rd and Charlottetown. So if you are familiar with the operations of CP, they have a pretty heavy left turn from Charlottetown onto 4th because their decks access 4th, along with parking options at 7th. So what we asked of them was to add a left turn lane at 3rd and Charlottetown in order to give the commuter traffic coming into Uptown the opportunity to bypass their traffic, and also sort of commit that storage space to their traffic that's turning into their decks. So they were agreeable. It does not expand the intersection any. It can all be done within the existing curb lines, so we're not creating a wider crossing. But we are creating arguably additional network by giving a left turn option where currently left turns are restricted.
Can you see that plan? We can't see where you're pointing to on our screens. Okay.
So left turn lane here at 3rd and Charlottetown.
The Bojangles and the Autobahn.
And that would be a left turn on their property that's fenced right now? Or they're just going to widen? How are you widening this? I don't understand it, but whatever.
Yeah, it's an off-site improvement. The intersection at that location, there is a gas station on one corner.
Right.
The Auto Bell opposite, and this turns you onto the 3rd, 4th connector. So there is space between the curb lanes to adjust the median location and create a left turn pocket.
Okay.
So in terms of staff's recommendation on this petition, the petition is consistent with the Elizabeth area plan recommendation for residential office, retail on the subject property. And looking at this, the property is in the commercial core of the plan area, and it's adjacent to the Lynx Blue Line. The request will allow for more intensive institutional uses for CPCC. It will provide apted ground floor uses that promote the pedestrian environment along Charlottetown and Elizabeth Avenues. It also provides architectural and design standards that complement the pedestrian environment that we're trying to create along those streets. The petitioner will provide urban open space that is shown in between the buildings on the site plan, and they are going to be removing a surface parking lot along Charlottetown Avenue and utilizing existing parking structures throughout the campus to eliminate the need for parking on site. So with that, staff will be happy to answer any questions.
So we'll hear from the petitioner. We have, hi Suzanne, it's good to see you. Suzanne Todd for, and Melanie Sizemore in opposition. I see up there. Hi Melanie. If you'll come down, we have 10 minutes per side, and we'll begin with you.
Good evening, Council, Zoning Committee, Mayor Lyles. My name is Suzanne Todd, and I'm here on behalf of the petitioner, Central Piedmont Community College. With me today is part of our development team. We've got Greg Long, Executive Director, Design Construction with CPCC. Got Jeff Smith, he's a Director of Civil Engineering with Stanley Lindsay and Associates, as well as Randy Goddard, our Traffic Engineer with Design Resource Group. CPCC believes that by educating the adults in this community creates a vibrant, knowledgeable, well-trained workforce that is attractive to companies and other organizations looking to relocate and expand in this area, as well as by providing up-to-the-minute programming and technology. Central Piedmont keeps students here in the community rather than having them go off to college and then relocating elsewhere. So we keep our talent in the area. The purpose of this rezoning, as you may have heard from Ms. Keplinger, is really to make all the rezonings within Central Piedmont, make all of the sites within Central Piedmont Community College, Central Campus, have the same zoning, MUD or MUD-O. So this produces the ability for us to seamlessly expand the campus and move forward with projects as funding arises. One thing I do want to make absolutely clear, and whether it was not conveyed correctly or strongly enough in our rezoning petition, but we are limiting the uses of this site to community college campus uses. We are not requesting to be able to put any type of MUD use on this property. So we are limiting it to college community campus uses such as offices, labs, conference rooms, possibly auditoriums, and any incidental uses that might go with it. For instance, maybe an art gallery or museum or a restaurant or a bookstore. A restaurant means something to serve the students. So I do want to be real clear, and we will make sure that the petition explicitly says that in the next go-round. I have a quick presentation. Again, this is hard to see, so we're just going to skip that. But essentially what we've got is we've got a site with 8 different little parcels that the CP has pulled together over the course of years. We're proposing 2 buildings on the site with a maximum of 250,000 square feet total. Building number 1, we have a maximum height of 100 feet. We were hoping for a 5-story building here, but we've only got the funding for a 4-story building, so it'll be 68,000 square feet. It's going to include interdisciplinary allied health labs. This is labs that will enable different students in different facets of healthcare to get together and train sort of a capstone study philosophy. Diagnostic medical sonography, that's for you and me, like ultrasound labs, polysonography, which is sleep study labs, dental assisting, and then we will be expanding the civil engineering technology program. Building number 2 is not programmed at this time, so we don't know what's going to be in it. At this point, what we're proposing, and you can see that building number 1 is at the corner of Charlottetown and 5th. Backing up is right there. You can see it, and it comprises of approximately 5 of the portions. All are portions of 5 of the lots of the 8 that are subject to this rezoning. The elevations for this building looks very similar to the elevations of the buildings that CP has built over the past 10 years. That is the front of Building 1. Building 1 is expected to start construction this summer, and it will be completed in 2020. Meantime, the building space or the footprint for Building 2 will be maintained as open space until it is funded. At time in the future when funding is received, Building 2 will be constructed. It will. We don't have exact elevations for Building 2, but it will be in harmony with the rest of the buildings developed by CPCC along Charlottetown Avenue, red brick veneer, Georgian style, precast concrete or precast stone, and that's something we've committed to in our site plan. You can see this is in this photograph, the site that we're redeveloping is on the left, And this photograph, the site that we're redeveloping is on the right. So you can see what those buildings look like that CP has developed around it. And this is building down Elizabeth, so similar. As far as commitments we've made, I believe Ms. Quinn has expressed some of them, but we're providing a pedestrian refuge. Right here, we are providing a 12-foot multi-use path along the front of Charlottetown Avenue versus the normal 8-foot sidewalk. We are providing up to $14,000 contribution for blank-out signs, dual message blank-out signs for provide pedestrian and bicycle safety, as well as the